Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
And we are the aforementioned show. That is Brad. Oh, no, excuse me. That is John Combest. John, are you there?
I am here, Brad. How are you this morning?
I am. If any better, they'd pass a law against it. You spell his last name Combest, put it together, JOHNCOMBEST.com. You've got his website. Every single day he goes through hundreds of sources, picks out 20, 30, 40 top stories in the state of Missouri, news, politics, things like that, puts it together online, but we take a special segment of the show. We call it A Block, and we get this guy by the name of...
I'm Casey Kasem.
And John counts us down the top three, and we start with... ironically, number 3.
In third place,
unique feature of the Post-Dispatch. Just about every year, Brad, the Post-Dispatch sends a reporter called Jess Bogan out to do a bit of a safari, to go into the wild and do a little bit of dangerous reporting, cultural anthropology. Now, in the past, he's gone to Potosi, Missouri. In the past, he's gone to Harrisonville, Missouri. But in today's piece, Brad, he goes down to southeast Missouri. He ventures all the way from the Post-Dispatch headquarters all the way down to southeast Missouri. In the anthropology pieces, he actually goes out and talks to people in these rural areas, in these areas that are not St. Louis or Kansas City or the People's Republic of Colombia. The headline of the Jess Bogan piece today is, Kamala Harris may be energizing Democrats, but Southeast Missouri voters aren't impressed. And Brad, he starts by talking to Stephen Limbaugh, relative of the famous Rush Limbaugh, and then goes around and talks to folks at the Dollar Tree, does kind of the man on the street and woman on the street interview, talks to some white people, talks to some black people, some people who love Trump, a couple people who feel pretty good about Kamala, some people who aren't going to vote, Kamala, some people who aren't going to vote. And I would say, Brad, what I found interesting about this piece is that I feel like this is a pretty objective piece by Jess Bogan. And I would point out, if folks go to my website today, I linked to his 2 previous cultural anthropology pieces. The first one in 2021, Brad, he went out and he talked to people that were skeptical of government claims about COVID. There were some people out there, Brad, that were skeptical that the government was telling the truth. And these folks were suggesting that maybe COVID wasn't that bad and maybe the vaccines didn't work to prevent the virus. So that was pretty crazy. So check it out. A good temperature. Brad, this would be a good time for you to, a few times a week, you point out the fact you do an early victory dance on the fact that Kamala Harris is going to win. Do you want to talk about we usually do this 3 times a week, of why you feel like Kamala is going to win the presidential race?
No, I don't give a victory dance. I'm just stating the obvious. I mean, once again, I mean, there's the problem here is, and the thing today is all ballyhooed about, Kamala's doing an interview. Well, she can't do it by herself. She's got to do it with her wingman, Tim Walz, okay? The woman just can't speak off the cuff. That's all there is to it. And the problem is, on this very radio station, and you know what? I'm going to sound like an old guy when I say this, but on this very radio station, we have some breaks that we have to fill with. We don't have commercials yet, but so we fill with some various things. I found a source of a bunch of old Ronald Reagan speeches and things like that. And most of these are ones where he is talking off the top of his head, okay? He's just talking. And I've actually had, in the course of this radio station, probably a half dozen people say to me, oh my God, I heard your station and I heard those Ronald Reagan clips. I can't believe how good he was. And once again, even to the point where people talk about Trump, well, Trump's really not that good. Trump goes all over the place, and Trump, gotten to the point where Trump has a bunch of canned phrases that he uses all the time. we don't have those true off the cuff orators. And every once in a while, somebody comes along, and you know who I say that is now, and you're going to laugh
Who's
at
that?
me. It's Tulsi Gabbard. Have you ever heard of her?
Yeah, she's really good. Yeah, she's really good.
And you throw her a question, and she gives you an answer, and she doesn't give you political speak, and you feel like it's really coming from her heart, not some political guy in the back room. Oh, Tulsi, here's if you ask this, here's how you have to respond. You know what I'm saying? And
I do know, but remember that Tulsi has told you before when you met her. She told you to stop staring at her heart, Brad.
and other parts of her
And
body.
Brad, I should also point out that when I use the phrase victory dance, I don't mean that you're celebrating about Kamala. I'm pointing out that you have correctly predicted the outcome of the last several presidential elections.
I have.
And your victory dance post-November, you will remind us often that you correctly, if Kamala wins, you will point out that you correctly predicted that. That's your victory dance.
Well, the irony of the whole situation is, and I heard it the other day, that someone was playing on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Someone was playing a parody bit about Vice President Harris, and this was the whole thing with this was pre-debate debacle with Biden and Biden dropping out in the whole bit. And on Jon Stewart's show, they were making fun of how bad she is. Okay, and once again, we talked about this before. One of the things that people kept saying, well, Biden has to keep running because we can't have Kamala Harris be the new presidential candidate because there's no way she's going to win. She's terrible. We'll have to look at Gretchen Wilson, who used to be the country western star in Michigan. We'll have to look at what's his face, interestingly enough, I read this the other day. I forgot about this. What's the governor of California's name? My mind's blank right now.
Gavin Newsom.
Gavin Newsom. He was not invited to the DNC convention. Did you know this?
Well, because he's too big of a star. Do ugly girls invite pretty girls out to the bar, Brad? If you're an oinker and you have a couple mid-level mediocre guys that you're trying to impress, you don't invite the girl from Kappa Kappa Gamma to come.
Well, my point being that in 3 months we've gone from a woman who nobody thought would be able to ultimately run for president of the United States to the point where she's being anointed as the most. By the way, I made a huge mistake the other morning, and this was caught by one of my listeners. I pronounced Kamala's parents dead. Her father is still alive. Do you know this?
No, she brought him back to life. That's
No.
in another. Did faith healer Cory Bush have something to do with it?
Oh, he's still alive, and he's not happy with her. Matter of fact, there is, let's pick this up. By the way, we have, and I'm on Mr. Thampy. What's his first name?
Oh, Eben Thampy.
Yeah, we have him in the B block. Did I tell you this?
Oh, well, that's good to know on this show that I'm a co-host of. Good to know that he's coming on. Also, I'm glad that we were able to set that up because we've talked a lot about the Delta 8 stuff lately. So what you're saying is, Brad, you're saying that Kamala has not been good on the stump, and we just got a text that said, I found her oral skills to be very spontaneous. Do you know a Willie B? We have a listener named Willie B.
Here goes John.
He says she's
again.
Very spontaneous orally.
Here's goes John. Okay, the crazy thing on this is that once again, and what's interesting is also if you notice, there's all these little things from her staff that what was the news the other day? We've been talking about it. All of a sudden, it's now coming from her staff saying, Kamala thinks it might be a good idea to build that wall across the border,
But you know what? She hasn't had an opportunity to affect any policy the last 4 years, Brad, so give her a break.
Well, the interesting part of this is this goes back to Rush Limbaugh, and he got in trouble for this saying the low information voter. And the low information voter is not you, nor me, nor any of the people that nor any of the Scott Fawn crowd. I mean, that's you guys are like the top 1%. Can I put you in that category? You're top 1%. Okay?
Of paying attention, sure.
Well, yeah, right. You know what's
sure.
going on, okay? And then there's probably a level below that where people, they know who the governor is and they know who the lieutenant governor is, and they might even know who Jay Ashcraft is and stuff like that. But then below that level, people will say, well, like, okay, the state of Missouri has a governor. Who is that? And
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? I mean, and that's the majority of the people. Now, the buzz here is that here we go again. It's like the Barack Obama thing. It's like we have someone who is going to be a first, and that's what everybody's fixated on. It doesn't matter if that first is the smartest person in the world who could end up being the best president in the history of the country, or the worst person in the world who could be, the worst president in the country. It just matters that we have first.
It's just a first. And speaking of diversity, Brad, that leads nicely to story number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
The Southeast Missourian headline today. Delegates from Cape Girardeau reflect on historic DNC experience. 2 delegates from the 8th Congressional District, that's the southeast part of Missouri, a woman named Geneva Allen Patterson, and a human who presents as sort of male, a guy or a gal named Brock Freeman, attended the Democratic National Convention. So this is kind of a local interest story. But here's what applies to everybody in the state of Missouri, Brad. If you're a young person, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, or you're an older person, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, and you want to go to the convention, this woman, Geneva Allen Patterson, has a pretty good gambit here. She got elected. She's an old black lady, and she got elected to represent the 8th district. Now, there's not many Democrats down there anymore, so I'm guessing there wasn't a whole lot of competition for people who actually want to go there. But here's the thing. She, quote, this is according to the reporter, was initially afraid she wouldn't be able to go because of financial restrictions. So she got everybody to subsidize her trip to Chicago. It's very expensive to hop on a Greyhound and go to Chicago, Brad. So she got local Democrats, and she says members of the community, to subsidize her trip to Chicago. So I think this should be a blueprint. I'm sure there's people for whom their financial condition restricts their ability to go to a convention city. So get elected and then go to the party leaders and say, guess what? I'm not coming unless you pay for my trip.
So how much money did she raise? Was it a GoFundMe or something like that?
They didn't say, and I'm sure, I'm sure she won't say. I'm sure it was all spent very judiciously too. And then the other human here too, what's interesting is she said she thanks everybody for providing the funds so that Brock, and that's the human that presents as either male or female, could go, she said. So I'm guessing based on that maybe local people subsidized, paid for the whole trip for her and this male or female presenting humanoid to go. So, I think it's just a good reminder, Brad, if you feel like you don't have the means to participate in the political process, get elected, and then maybe say, hey, I'm not going to go unless you guys pay for my trip.
But see, John, here once again, we're talking about the 1%ers. These are the 1%ers.
Yeah, you're right. There's about 1% of the boot heel is Democrat. You're right, Brad.
Well, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these are the people who are once again, these are the people. These are the Cindy Cristofanelli. I mention her all the time. She's the mother of Phil Cristofanelli, who ran for Senate and state Senate. He was a state rep for 8 years. They eat, drink, and sleep politics. And once again, I have no problem with that. But that's the minority of the people. The majority of the people, once again, I'm going to ask you a question, okay? You've got kids in Francis House School District, right?
I have a child in the Francis House School District, yeah.
Can you tell me two of the names of the board members on the Francis House
Yeah,
School Board?
Adam Bertrand and your favorite, Jane Pushkar.
You are a 1%er, because I bet you could stand out in front of any of the schools, if you could, like any of the parents dropping off kids at any of the Francis House schools, and as you could just stand up and you hold a sign, can I ask you a question? And they pull up, and as they roll down the window, the marijuana smoke rolls out of their car.
Yeah.
You could say to them, can you name me one board member on the Francis House School Board? I doubt if you could find 5 people out of 100 cars that would know one board member's name. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Although they could probably tell you what's trending on TikTok at the moment.
Or they could,
And also, if you went to a nursing home, Brad,
right?
and you asked the nursing home residents the name of the most popular Republican politician in Missouri, I bet they'd say the star of story number 1.
And that would be
The number 1.
Good news for people in Missouri that are looking to throw away their vote. We had good news last week when it was announced that RFK Jr. and the Green Party made the Missouri ballot. More good news. John Danforth. You remember that name, Brad?
It's interesting. He was being skewered on 97.1 this morning. Why is he back in the public view again? What's the story?
Well, every couple years, it seems like now he's on a pattern of endorsing candidates with no chance to win. And there's an old Simpsons meme where it says, "Old man shakes fist at cloud." Every couple years, John Danforth, or I guess I should say whoever has his power attorney, wheels him out, and he gives a speech about how terrible Trump and Josh Hawley are. And he is endorsed. There's a guy who made up something called the Better Party. A guy named Jared Young created out of thin air what he's calling the Better Party. And, it's one of those things that will last for, 6 months or whatever, where they don't like the Democrats and they don't like the Republicans. And then the media's like, oh my God, it's so great that we have another choice. And John Danforth now endorses this guy named Jared Young, who will have his name on the ballot for people who don't want to vote for Josh Hawley and aren't going to vote for extra medium T-shirt guy, the Democrat guy. They can throw their vote away for Jared Young. So last time this happened, which was 2022, you might remember, Brad, Danforth endorsed a guy named John Wood. Do you remember that whole John Wood thing?
You know what? It's interesting you bring this up, because unfortunately I do remember this, because it's just so bizarre that, like you said, they sort of wheel him out and he comes out with these strange, people that he's, once again, the guy, I'm an underdog kind of guy, so I shouldn't say strange. Any of these people who are running for any office on anything other than the Republican Democratic Party, they let's be honest, they don't have a snowball's chance in hell. But I still am applaud their tenacity of going against the grain, if you know what I'm saying.
I do. Yeah, I boo them, and I think they're wasting everybody's time. And they're like a child that comes up to you and says that they're going to, they have a plan to take over the world. But with a child, you have some empathy, and children have excuses, and they should dream big. When people like Jared Young say, "Oh, I'm going to build my own party," you're not. Like, he's not. And the greatest thing is, Brad, here's living proof of this. Years ago, I'm old enough to remember 2022. When John Danforth and John Wood said that they were going to change the world and they're, get elected to Senate or whatever, John Wood's campaign, I believe, lasted 6 weeks. It might have lasted 8 weeks. John Danforth spent $6 million on that campaign, Brad.
But
so I know that nobody gets hurt and it's just some old man's money, but Danforth has relatives that could probably use $6 million, right?
Well,
so the knee-jerk thing, real quick, Brad, the knee-jerk thing where we applaud people who run vanity campaigns and say, oh, it's so brave of them to run a third-party campaign. No, it's not. Like, why do we reflexively reward that? Run as a Democrat, run as a Republican, run as a libertarian. Stop wasting time on independent campaigns.
Okay, but the interesting thing, you talk about wasting money, and once again, me being the ultimate underdog, there was this guy once upon a time, I think the year was 2016.
And he had high name ID. He was on a television show for many years. He had a strong vision, and he had a message that people wanted to hear. Donald Trump is not Jared Better Party man, Brad.
Okay, John, you just blew me right out of the water, man.
We've had this discussion a dozen times, and I bring it up every time. Donald Trump did not emerge from the marijuana smoke in Spanish Lake and suddenly create a campaign out of nowhere. He had higher name idea than almost anybody in the race, Brad. So
Okay.
it's a terrible analogy, and you should probably stop making it because I'm going to shoot it down every time.
But everybody made fun of him, and look who he got to be the president of the United States, and look where he's at again. So in other words,
there you go.
Okay, we have to take a break.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?